This webinar is delivered by STFC Food Network, and I'm pleased to be the moderator for the webinar today. My name is Dr. Ifeanyi Wakanu. I'm the founder and CEO of IntelliDigest, and at IntelliDigest, we focus on food system sustainability. The STFC Food Network has been doing a lot of work in terms of supporting researchers and also organizations and policymakers with regards to looking into the food system and how we can improve access to good food to more people. Today, we'll be looking at food waste and also looking at how technologies are enabling to deliver a sustainable food system where food waste can be better and more efficiently managed. Globally, 1/3 of food grown for human consumption is currently wasted. So if there's any way we can work on that and really eliminate food waste, then that will be to the advantage of everyone, and also, more importantly, the environment, because a lot of the food we produce has got massive impact on soil degradation and reduction in soil nutrient quality, which also impacts on the entire ecosystem. So really addressing the issue of food waste has got a impact across the food system. To help us to look into this today will be Dr. Abiye Tob-Ogu. He's an experienced academic within the Operations Management and Decision Sciences Division at Sheffield University Management School. His teaching and research interests center around operations and interdisciplinary sustainability challenges, cutting across core operations management, CSR, logistics, and supply chain management. In 2022, Abiye won the SFN Scoping Project Award for his project, Food Access, Distributed Ledger Technology Integration for Optimizing Food Supply Chain Communications and Transport. With this introduction, I welcome Dr. Abiye Tob-Ogu to take off and tell us more about the project he's worked on. Thank you very much, Dr. Abiye, for making all the time today.
Hello, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and welcome to today's presentation. Thank you, Ify, for the introduction, and thank you, Cindy, for putting this together. I will try not to keep everyone too long. Like Ify's already said, I'm an academic at the Sheffield University Management School, where I teach as well as execute research. And in the year 2020, so during the onset of COVID, or in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic, I was one of the beneficiaries of the SFN scoping grants, which enabled me to take my idea or move from ideation to scoping and subsequent development. Today, I'll be making a presentation on decentralized logistics and food waste, looking at how simple solutions from technology can help to develop useful outcomes. I will start by introducing a caveat to affirm that this is not a complete research, but this is a work in progress. But I believe that the update or the progress that has been made is useful, and there are future opportunities, or there are opportunities for collaboration and progression over time. So quickly, without making much, I think if he's already introduced me, so I will skip the bit about myself. My research essentially stems from two principal areas. One is food access and the other is food waste. In this regard, we know from research that food access, which necessarily is or reflects the ability of people to be able to acquire the right amount of nutrients when they consume food, or to consume, whichever way you look at it. And food access is a big global issue today. The FAO and other United Nations organizations suggest that Africa has significant food access problems. And as we can see on the slides, Nigeria has 32% and counting that did not have adequate food access. That means those children weren't able to acquire enough nutrients to sustain them as would be required. And this is a problem that we are seeing starting to expand across parts of Asia, as well as even Europe here. If you've been following the news recently, you would have seen in the last couple of days that there's been shortages of certain foods, like lettuces, tomatoes, and there's a projection that this might grow, and this raises big questions around food security. The second bit to the other side of this discourse is around food waste. So whilst certain people have problems with accessing food, some other groups or corresponding groups also have problems with being able to manage food. And what it essentially means is that we are getting a lot of planned, but more importantly, unplanned loss of food once they have been harvested. And the estimates from the FAO suggests that Nigeria, for example, loses about $9 billion per annum as a result of post-harvest losses. And this could be anything from, for example, for a crop like rice, it could be from the waste during the harvest process, it could be from spoilage, it could be from loss during, excuse me, from loss as a result to processing. So this got me thinking that in the midst of so much hunger, as we know with SDG2, in the midst of so much hunger, there's a lot of waste going on. And how could we help to address this issue? So earlier on in 2014, I had done a small study in Ghana, very small study with about 5-6 farmers. And we looked at the impact of transportation on their well-being and their economic viability. And essentially what we had found was that because farmers struggled with transportation in Africa, significant amounts of their produce went lost. So for example, with cocoa, we found out that sometimes it would take up to 3-4 days from when they were harvested up until when they got to perhaps the processing centers or even the collection centers. And the farmers, some farmers suggested as much as 8% of the weight of the product was lost per day around that waiting time. And that meant that what they got economically in terms of the value of their cocoa, which was measured by way of weight, was much less, sometimes losing up to 30% of what they could originally have gained. And so I have looked at this issue and informed, my further research to look into the issues around food waste, because essentially what was going on was production. Yes, we still need to perhaps produce a bit more food, but the estimation is that if we can reduce the amount of food that we waste, then we could be looking at 20-30% or even more greater figures in terms of how people are better nourished in terms of their access to food and general well-being and the gains that we have. So I in my own research and specialization narrowed this down to a logistics perspective, being logistics encompasses transport for both goods, general goods, and personnel, or if you prefer to use the word mobility. And it's in this context, geared towards economic or emergency fulfillment. And what we mean here is the scope of the research is not looking at general, leisure travel, etc., but more towards, economic or emergency personnel, but specifically in this case, it would be towards the transport of general goods. And, research recognizes this as a critical enabler of value chains. Without logistics, there is no value chain. If you go back to one of the seminal works in here by Professor Porter, and you look at his value chain, you would see that logistics underpins a lot of or all of the activities or the silos. They're just like information. And so when we optimize logistics, we're able to optimize the value that we can get within the process or within our value chain. And so transport is one of those key logistics performance, in addition to other factors like warehousing, inventory, etc., and your typical day-to-day operations. But it's not often, for a long time being at the central focus of planning, with many organizations, but also with many institutions. If we think back to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, and even the lessons that we may have learned, we saw how unprepared many government departments were for handling logistics. I think we had a Secretary of State who did not really know what supply chain and logistics typically was. So it's often one of those parts that many businesses or many industries tend to underplay. But when you are in the field, or when you know your business, you suddenly realize that in many cases, logistics becomes the underpinning for whether an operation succeeds or it doesn't. Without wasting your time, basically, having looked at that problem and located our main focus, which, as I indicate here, is with the period post-harvest and just before transformation, because there is wastage across every part of this value chain. But for feasibility purposes, no research can tackle the problem across all of these different components. So our attention was focused mostly on, or my attention was focused mostly on, the post-harvest intersection. So just before transformation, whether transformation happens before consumption, or happens simultaneously, or it goes independently. But focus is how we can reduce that. And if we defer back to the example I gave from Ghana and subsequent studies, and I wouldn't bore you with around cassava, etc., what we find is that two principal challenges arise: one, communications, and two, access to transport in the agricultural value chain, particularly within Africa, or specifically within Nigeria, where we looked at in this case. Communications has to do with the access to the logistics partners, as well as perhaps buyers that would help to procure and take off products at the point of harvest. And in Africa, in many rural areas, communications is improving now, but for many decades, it's been very poor. When you have communication issues and you do not have transport access or adequate transport access, it becomes a two-pronged challenge, or it becomes a double-edged sword that causes severe devastation, because farmers can have produce, or typically have produces, that they watch rot by their farm sites post-harvest whilst waiting to arrange transport. And the process of arranging transport is sometimes like a gambling act, where you wait in the hope that a transport company or a transport vehicle will go past and you'd be able to flag them to pick up your goods, etc., etc. So it's very informal, very unstructured, and creates a lot of uncertainties and waste. And sometimes in certain cases in northern and middle parts of Nigeria, even when they eventually get transport, by the time the goods get to the market where they are then bought and sold or sub-transported, they've lost part of their value. So you're looking at a number of days, and some of these products are perishables that do not have very long lifespans. So that's where our research is focused. And the key argument we're trying to make here is to highlight, one, that transport plays a very critical role in ensuring that the waste that, or part of the waste that we're experiencing in food and agricultural production can be addressed. It can be addressed, and even though it's a daunting problem because there are other issues relating to transport, like infrastructure, perhaps, and when I say infrastructure, that would be the physical roads, access, but also the types of vehicles. And in Africa, we have something called co-consumption. Co-consumption in this instance means that in many cases or many instances, the same vehicles that are being used to transport food are also being used to transport people at the same time. And this simultaneous co-consumption suddenly becomes competitive, and drivers may arbitrarily decide to prioritize one after the other, typically prioritizing people over goods, etc., because they are not there weren't enough would I say carriers that were dedicated to food. And this creates, a unique problem that is not common in, say, Europe. In Europe, you don't have, the same buses taking people, as well as agricultural produces in whether big or small stock. So it's something that we thought was suboptimal, and we could find a way to address this by technology. And then over the period of the research that we've done, we've also identified issues relating to, the problems of payments for transport, and critically, provenance. So with provenance, there is a concern about, especially as we move towards a more sustainable future, people want more visibility and traceability across supply chains. And sometimes it's difficult to tell where a product has come from or produce has come from, because there is no provenance, there's no traceability. So research intervention was geared towards addressing these issues, or exploring how we could deploy technology to address some of these issues. And decentralized logistics simply means that rather than having a central chain of command, I tapped into your DLC model, your distributed ledger model and transaction model, which for common parlance, your blockchain model, to look at how we could use technology to decentralize the concentration of communications and transport within the logistics or the agro-logistics industry in Nigeria, and thereby address the issues around asset utilization, but also principally communications. And what we're trying to do here is to potentially make every farmer have access to every buyer, and every buyer have access to every logistician, transporter, same with the farmer. So open up almost like an open marketplace that's dedicated to transport and communications of agricultural products. So moving forward, as I mentioned, I got the STFC grant in 2020, around September, October 2020. And between January and June 2021, we moved forward and commissioned actual groundwork in terms of executing the research. We had 3 farmers, 3 transporters or transport providers, so people with transport vehicles, 1 cassava processing firm that was a direct partner, also our industry partner in the with the application to the STFC, and several subsistent buyers for the products. We provided the participants with communications equipment, typically mobile phones, and subscription to support them, because again, there were certain issues that had propped up in terms of how people viewed mobile phones and what they use for it. And the objective here was to develop an app, and we use an agile Scrum development, which is essentially a very flexible approach to web development, where we were working, and as we were working, we were observing some of the weaknesses within the systems or even the concept, and we were trying to tweak that over time. And so we did that over the space of about 6 months, in terms of working with the farmers, transporters, going back and forth with the developer. And also we conducted a small quantitative survey on how COVID-19 had impacted, transport and food access in Nigeria, with over 80 respondents. It was just very small. It wasn't intended to, it was, I think the key thing for us was just to understand and verify our presupposition that the difficulties of food access and food waste was exacerbated by the COVID-19 incident. And we came up with an application demo version that was presented by a workshop that was organized in 2021 in partnership with the state legislative in Rivers State, Nigeria. And I think IFE as well as SONAL also participated in that particular workshop with over I believe in excess of 500 or thereabout participants, and some very good feedback as well. So that was where our general activities sort of went in terms of the project funding, and some key findings or key outcomes that we established. One was that the feedback from the farmers was that the application improved their transport access. So basically, by using the demo app, what the farmers found out was they could pre-plan their harvest, and in pre-planning their harvest, they could also contact the transporters that were on the app to arrange for the products to be picked up much quicker. So it was just enabling them to be able to arrange that, which wasn't something that they had access to before. So they found it quite useful. We also found out that it was easy for buyers, so our partners, to trace where different supplies were coming from. And provenance, like I said, it's a very important issue, especially as companies are looking to reduce supply chain risks. So this was quite interesting, and it's something that we want to build on. But also all of this sort of increased predictability for the firm, because our partners could now plan their cassava production or cassava product conversion or production or their operations better, and it reduced some of the challenges that they had with trying to source products and planning their general everyday operations. And we also know that feedback suggests that the application increased the utilization of transport access, and this is transport assets, and this is something that wasn't typically looked at, but a very useful outcome in the sense that I think one of the participating transporters typically did not transport agricultural food products. It was more about personnel, and there were times when his asset, so his vehicle, was redundant, but through the app he could better plan and sort of have a schedule for when something was being picked up, and that meant that the downtime for his asset was less, plus the unused or underutilized movements that they would typically have had, maybe sometimes going from one place to the other, hoping that somebody will flag them down, reduce. So that was beneficial. Some other findings that we have that we observed that weren't so positive related to things like payments and permits. So it's one thing to arrange communications and transport online, but infrastructure to support payments, cashless payments and all that did not really exist. And there were also permit issues. So in southern parts, or in most parts of Nigeria, you have tiered systems of permits, where perhaps within local governments or other institutions, they would have persons that collect monies from people, from drivers and transporters, and give them money fiscally to do certain things. And it's not a very organized system. It's chaotic, and it was something that the drivers tend to struggle with, and still struggled with. So that's a problem that needs to be addressed. The intervention did not completely eliminate, the concerns about infrastructure. So for many transporters, or in some instances, the transporters will charge more to get to certain farms just simply because the roads were bad or terribly difficult to navigate. And I think most worryingly was the feedback from both the transporters and the farmers, which essentially suggested that many young people today particularly in the southern part and perhaps even in the northern part of Nigeria, are not interested in farming of traditional crops because they cannot see a way to prosperity through that, and they see a lot of these challenges around. So essentially that tradition of farming in certain areas is becoming it's passing out. I know a lot of people are going into animal and husbandry, so like fisheries, poultry seems to be where a lot of the farming or agricultural activities are. But in terms of crops, this is becoming a big problem, and it's something needs to happen to be able to address that. So those were our key findings, and I will introduce you to what we have currently as our product. So the outcome from additional efforts and personal funding that have gone into develop the actual app post the conclusion of the scoping fund. So what we have is Useri, the Useri app, and Useri means evidence in one of Nigeria's local languages. And I've been working closely with developers. We're hoping to launch the app on Google and Apple Store this month, but they've had some delays and issues with election related matters. So it's projecting that it'll be about the middle of the coming month. So these things happen with projects like this. And so this would be symbolic of, say, the landing page. So when you open the app, and I will quickly run through a bit of a demo, but as you can see, I have captured the backgrounds for some of the modules. So you have the modules for John here, who is essentially a farmer, and also the module for James, who is a buyer, and the modules for Emeka, who is a transporter. And the idea is to get as many farmers, as many buyers, institutional and non-institutional buyers, as well as interested transporters to register on the app, and to be able to communicate directly, setting up farming schedule, helping to collect data on farms, crops, farm size, harvest dates, arrange for logistics, even process buying, as well as payments, all online. And what this essentially does is it decentralizes the control of any group of persons over produce. It reduces the uncertainties for farmers in terms of their planning. It also helps buyers with their plannings for their operations. And like I talked about logistics people, it creates an availability for them to better utilize their assets through planning. Have I got time to do a quick demo? Yeah, no?
I think that should be fine.
Yeah, sure, please go ahead.
Okay. Sorry. I'll just share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, so this is just a quick prototype demo, and if this was, landing page, they'd be expected to sign up. So if I was a farmer, again, this is all set for the demo, and it's got a verification system. So one of the things we've been able to do here, and this is based on feedback, is to find ways to help farmers to quantify both the size of their land as well as their produce, which is something that we found many of them did not know. They know that they've got big plots of land or this land, etc., but can't really quantify if it's 2 plots, if it's 3 hectares or 2 hectares. So one of the things we're trying to do is to help to generate information in this regard. And I know that at the pitch for this scoping, this was one of the things we mentioned with regards to how we could help improve the database for agriculture in Africa or in Nigeria. Yes, so this person has registered with their farm name, etc., and put the information there. We can see 1 to 3 plots, and they could add their produce, put in the periods for, put in the periods for the harvest, etc. Upload pictures. If it was some, so in this case, maybe it was a cassava farmer, and go ahead to put in their bank account details to support transactions where possible, and they could monitor their products. So if there were orders that had come, pending orders, etc., they could see all of that. There's a notification system. They can add multiple farms, add new producers, edit their profiles, and so it's we're trying to keep it as simple and least complicated as possible. So in the marketplace, these are obviously the N is for Naira, which is the local currency, but different crops and the general state of their their orders in the market or product in the market. They could receive notifications about orders from buyers. What's unique here, and I touch on this later, is the fact that it is generally geared towards agriculture. So there's nothing else being traded on the app. There's nothing else being moved on the app. It's completely geared towards agriculture, and we hope that that brings everyone to, or serious like-minded parties to the same table. So this is again typical for logistics vehicle. You could have descriptions, how old, how new, etc., the type of vehicle, put up pictures, and they'd have a registration, approvals. Again, there are regulatory and practice limitations that we have to account for, and we're hoping that we can improve on these over time. So for example, being able to vet drivers or vet vehicles to reduce issues of mismanagement or theft, etc. Within, and the plan is to be able to work with some of the agencies in Nigeria, to be able to complete this. So yeah, I would stop sharing this now and go back to the presentation and just finish that. So, sorry. Moving forward, we'd also have a back end to this, and as you can see, we'd be able to see some of this data, but we want to reduce our access to some of the information with the back end. Yes, please, Megan. I think Megan's got a question.
I was hoping that we can take the questions at the end of the presentation.
I was going to take it at the end, if that's all right. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Sorry. That's fine. So who are solution users? So like I mentioned, targeted audience includes the buyers, farmers and agro-production businesses, logistics businesses and transporters, policymakers and finance firms. And I've put those in italics because it wasn't within our original scope for the project, but based on the feedback from the workshop that we had in Nigeria, a lot of policymakers were interested in working with us, as well as finance firms, because they saw the opportunities to help to streamline data, and also better manage aspects of their food policies. The finance firms felt like there were opportunities to help support or it could provide them with a better channel to be able to support agricultural businesses that were interested, because then they could see it afforded them more transparencies. I cannot say that we have a clear-cut idea on how we want to work this at the moment, but these were, some of the feedback that we had, that even though we hadn't seen this as useful for, or they weren't the target solution users, the feedback from the workshop that we had in Port Harcourt in 2021 suggested that they'd be quite interested in this. And then how are we hoping to promote the use? I know that there are a number of people that are waiting to use it from a personal network, but in terms of access, it's supposed to be free. So the intention is for it to be free, and over time introduce gamification, so little reward systems for people that use the app to improve their network yields, translate into multiple languages so that people from around Nigeria are able to use it, because not everyone can communicate in English. But if we're to expand, then I've included languages like Swahili, Twi, etc., which are prevalent in Ghana, Kenya, and parts of Eastern Africa, if there was room for expansion. And functionalities, so there are components that the data from the application can be used to support bookkeeping, which also increases, traceability, but also the viability of some of these small businesses. What are the benefits that we hope to provide? One, because it's based on, well, not completely, but based on a DLT tech, we're trying to encrypt the information, or we try to ensure that the information is confidential and secure, and only parties to transactions have that information, that between them, unless in cases of disputes, then we will then be able to see triple. It's not for monitoring purposes. Like I said, it's bespoke, and so it's the only agro-focused app that is likely to exist. But maybe I might be late to the market now, seeing that there's been a 2-year plus gap from the presentation. But it's also certainty. So when for them, the fact that like one of them said, I can go to the farm in 2 or 3 days time, knowing that there's a potential buyer that has placed an order for maybe the 6 or 7 tubers of cassava that I'm going to be uprooting. That's a big advantage, and that's a big support for that farmer, because he then doesn't have to worry about, what if I can't get it out on time for this market day, which happens maybe once every 2 weeks or every month? What if I can't do this? What if I can't do that? So it breaks down some of those difficulties, and they felt like it would encourage them to continue farming and to even do more and expand more in that regard. And during the period where we worked with those 3 farmers and the companies, we found that none of their products went to loss. In hindsight, yes, they did highlight that some of their cassava would rot, or it would be shrunk by the time they got to consume them or sell them, and it was bad. But we didn't collect statistics on what exactly the percentage from those specific farmers. But we know that the feedback we got from that little scoping exercise was that they didn't experience any of those. So they had more certainty. The transporters picked things up on time, and the cassava company from Ava had the products coming in on time. They were useful to them. They found it felt there was less resistance. And then moving forward, again, like I said, there are opportunities within the UK and the EU to help reduce supply chain risk by improving provenance. So there is scope for us to start working, or agencies to work with agencies and work with farmers to better manage their farms, get data. So for example, the type of pesticides or fertilizers that they use, if any, if it's all organic, and gradually create a profile for companies, which then becomes a useful database for agencies that regulate imports, exports, etc., between those countries and the EU or the UK, or maybe even expand elsewhere. And in many indirect ways, I think we're contributing to the attainment of SDG 2, which is ensuring that by reducing food waste, we can improve improve productivity overall and improve food access in total. And I know I've taken a bit more time, but thank you for your understanding and thank you for your time. That would be all.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Abiye Tob-Ogu, for the fantastic presentation. A lot of insights you've shared regards to the motivation for the project and where the project is at the moment. We've had some interesting questions in the chat, and I know that Megan has put up her hand for quite a while, and Mesfin is also looking to ask some questions. So I will let Megan go first. Thank you.
Hi, that was a great talk, a very difficult project, I think. A couple of questions, comments, particularly where cocoa is concerned. I understand that a big problem with not just cocoa, but all these crops that are exported is that a lot of the value in the crop is realized during the manufacturing process. And it is a problem that the manufacturing is not, for example, chocolate manufacturing is not taking place in those areas where cocoa is being grown. And there are potentially very big health benefits from the consumption of cocoa, for example, in terms of cardiovascular health. So I just wondered, that's a kind of, do you think that is still the case? I looked at this about 4 or 5 years ago. I haven't kind of updated it since. The second thing I just wanted to highlight is that I think the app that you've developed is very valuable and has generic uses, not simply in the context of West Africa or Nigeria or in these areas, but actually could be of use, I think, globally. I'm at Leeds University, and I lead the food supply chain tracing theme on the university farm at the university, and I'm working with Jiangsu University, developing in packaging and techniques for applying sensors to raw products as well, because we're interested in the entire supply chain. And I personally, I think it is very important that we can actually follow the whole progress of the raw material right the way through to its consumer. So that end.
Thank you, Megan. Is my mic on? Yeah. Ify, how do you want me to respond to comment, or I could wait for everyone to?
I think it'd be better to just respond to Megan and then take up the question. Yeah.
Thank you, Megan, for the question or comment. With the issue of cocoa and how the value chain, I accept the position, or I accept that it's a difficult challenge. However, because with agriculture and value chain issues, the fairness or sustainability challenges can be quite daunting. My take has been we tackle a lot of these issues by focusing sometimes on the low-hanging fruits, and I think that with regards to this problem, the low-hanging fruit here is by helping farmers get the most value that they can at this point. So if we're able to reduce wastage at source or post-harvest, then there is a big possibility that the farmers will get better paid, It can also even mean that more people see it as a viable and rewarding system, because traditionally, and this is a long time, so it's been almost 9 years or 8 years when I did that study in Ghana. And for many farmers, it was a point of, okay, I do this just because I don't really have a choice anymore. Sometimes even when the cooperatives that will take the weight in and stuff got to their location, the farmers did not understand weights. So if we're able to help them or able to start getting transparent records about things like weights, farms, their product sizes, how to even, I spoke to some cassava producers and they don't understand tons. They don't take products in kgs. So it's difficult, and I know somebody's mentioned something about training and education, and yes, it's a big need that needs to be moved forward. But people often embrace things when they can see the use. So that's where I am sort of banking. And so I'm not sure how we can move much of the local manufacturing or value chain back to Africa, because alternatively, if I'm British cocoa manufacturing firm, I don't really want that to happen because I lose jobs, etc. But I think that if we can make the system a bit fairer, where farmers and locals feel like they're getting transparent value for their products, then we're helping to reach some sort of equilibrium, not a perfect one, but something closer. And I do take the point. It's something that I recognized, again, like I said, from the workshop that was organized. It suddenly dawned on me that, okay, this could be an idea that's bigger than what you are projecting. And so, yes, I wouldn't quite say the rest of the world, but I do think that there's greater scope to expand within Africa, and I'm willing to work with people to, get things progressing in little bits. But thank you very much for your comments.
Fantastic, thank you. Thank you, Abiye, for the response. Mesfin, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I want to comment some of the presentations that Dr. Abiye is performing now. Is my voice audible for everybody of you? I need to have a response.
Excellent.
Hello?
Yes,
Excellent.
yes.
Hello?
Just go on, Mesfin. We can hear you clearly.
Okay, can I continue?
Please. I think there could be some delay, but we're hearing you clearly, so you can just go ahead. Okay, it looks like we lost Mesfin. While Mesfin is trying to get on, there is a message.
It's internet issue actually. Can you hear me now, please?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go.
Okay, Dr. Abiy, thank you for your nice presentation. Actually, by the way, my Prime Minister is Dr. Abiy. So similar name actually. Well, I appreciate your presentation really, but I have one issue. Why didn't you incorporate the issue of climate? Because I'm working in the research area of trying to communicate between climate and food. So the issue of climate needs to be considered in this regard, I hope, because it does have a huge influence. As you might have realized, there is a very huge dynamics of climate since the last 3 decades, and we recognize that climate is really disturbing all the food production processing across the globe. So why climate not included in this area is my question, the first one. The second one is, whenever we just are dealing on food production and food improvement, the kind of food or the type of food that we are expected to consider will have also its own huge impact, because as I normally recognize most of the researchers and for production process in the world, all of the researches and the performances are directed to filling the tummy, which is I hope not important. We have to consider the nutritious part of the food as well. So have you looked at that part also? You just say simply food, and food. But whenever you just try to consider food, I hope nutrition should have to be the part. Because unless we provide sufficient amount of nutrients in most of the foods, it's very much difficult to address and have a continued generation as well, because sufficient nutrient supply means healthy and others as dimensions of life in the human population. So have you considered this? And would you please explain this, Dr. Abiye? Thank you for your nice presentation.
All right, thank you, Mesfin. I think you raised some very important questions. I'll start with the second. In terms of nutrition, I'm not an expert in food nutrition, but in my presentation, you'd have noticed that I did talk about food access, and the question around the issue around food access can be nuanced into smaller parts. One of those parts would be food nutrition. So certain people can have access to certain foods, but a measure of food access is whether the foods that they have access to provide them with the constituent or required nutrients that they need to survive or to be healthy. So it's not an area where I would say I have expertise. I just understand, having read some of the literature, I understand that for food scientists or for agencies or experts in that field, nutrition is very important, and the adequacy of different nutrients is something that's critical. Can my work help to support that? I think that by ensuring that we're producing food, which is the bigger focus here, and wasting less, there is a probability that we can help to indirectly address food nutrition. I give an example. So cassava is Africa's most stable crop. Well, I wouldn't say most consumed crop. It's consumed by over 80% of Africans in different forms. So people rely on it for different needs, food needs every day. Is cassava the most nutritious crop? Probably not, compared to some other crops. However, cassava provides people with the calories that they need to survive, especially within the context and climate that they operate. If we still have cassava going to waste, because cassava unfortunately has a good lifespan of about 48 hours, I believe. So after 48 hours, it begins to shrink and rot if it's not processed or consumed afterwards. And you still have wastage there. Then I think that if we're not producing enough, or if we're wasting after harvest, then it's going to be difficult for us to even talk about meeting the 2.7 K calories that the World or Food Organization suggests that we need to be consuming, or people need to be consuming per day to be healthy. So with the nutrition question, I would think that the works that people like yourself may be doing in terms of helping us understand nutrition better can be useful, but we cannot discuss nutrition if we do not have access to food. We're going to have to work hand in hand to address those issues, or to prioritize food access and then begin to work with nutrition. And this is common. In terms of the first question on climate, I know, I can't remember her name. There was a lady with STFC. I can't remember her name now, but she does some work with the STFC, and she mentioned doing some work around, being able to monitor the climate and to help farmers predict harvest periods, times, according to changes within the climate or the weather. So when's the best time to harvest your crops, when to avoid floods, those sort of things. And I think that research in those areas can underpin production, because I cannot say that climate change or climate in itself is accounting for the biggest portion of food waste, but it's significant. So with the floods that we see, the losses that farmers have after planting, when their crops and their fields are destroyed, the changes, all of these things have an impact. My main concern is in trying to ensure that the food that we're producing today, we minimize as much loss as we can. And if we're able to do that, those two things are not mutually exclusive. So we can focus on improving the climate as well as ensuring that we have enough production. And one of the things I forgot to mention with the app is, over time, the plan is to ensure that we put through proximity as a way of reducing the travel for transporters. So rather than having just anybody who offers the cheapest price or a most convenient vehicle to do a distribution task within the system will prioritize proximity. So if you're the closest person, the system will prioritize you in terms of moving goods between A and B, because that then reduces, the emissions quota in that sense.
Well, thank you very much, Abiye, for responding to that. Lisa, do you want me to read your post in the chat, or do you want to come in and just make some comments?
No, thank you. I think Abiye has already touched on it and given an answer.
Okay.
So that's very kind of him. Thank you, and good luck with the app. It looks really good.
Thank you, Lisa.
Well, it looks like we're running over the time,
yeah.
and just a quick question before we round off. Abiye, I'm just curious. You said the app is going to be free, so how do you intend to keep the app going over time?
It's a useful question. So we already have some interest from potential, would I say, partners or companies that want to sponsor maybe some ads on the app. So at the moment, and for the long term, the foreseeable future is that it's free at the access point to everybody. There may be ads that companies put on the application, and that helps to generate income to keep things going. Yeah, so that's the main plan.
Thank you very much. So it's going to be ad briefing.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks so much. And thanks everyone for joining. I will encourage us to look into the Plant to Save campaign, which is being supported by STFC Food Network, looking at how you can get more food. When I mean good food, just like Mesni mentioned, available to more people. And please do check out the upcoming webinars by STFC Food Network. And also, we also have a webinar coming up on Friday, looking at engineering a sustainable food system in recognition of World Engineering Day for Sustainable Development, which is also being supported by STFC Food Network, but delivered by IntelliDigest. Please feel free to stay in touch with us at STFC Food Network. I am one of the champions of STFC Food Network, as well as the founder and CEO of IntelliDigest. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'll hand back to you, Cindy.